Islam, peace and blessings. So I just want to say I'm aware of how random and how possibly reality altering a lot of the stuff that I'm saying is. So it's hard to grasp what I'm saying, hard to even vibe with it because you're so rooted in the inversion of lies. I'm sorry, the inversion of truth. You're so rooted in lies that it's hard for you to even comprehend the reality that you've actually been living in this entire time. So, in order for you to better understand and overstand and understand who you are as a person and where you really came from, what landmass you're truly affiliated with, I'm going to provide for you a backdrop into the history of the world outside of America, the real history of the world outside of America. So that way it's easier for you to digest what it is that I'm telling you right now and how you can be effective with this knowledge right now. All right, so I'm gonna dive into this book, Ancient and Modern Britons, and it's gonna be a semi-advanced teaching, whatever. Anybody who wants to evolve, anybody who wants to go forward, you're gonna have to be able to change and adapt. If you are not able to do that, you're not going to evolve. You're gonna remain the same. You're gonna stagnate. You're gonna plateau and calcify. What you need to do is be able to adapt. So I can't make this simpler for you. You're gonna have to stand up and you're going to have to become more intelligent as a human being, so-called human being, as a man of God, as a woman of God. You need to stand up and increase your IQ and separate from things that are lowering your vibration. Separate yourself from lower vibrations so you can operate the way that you were designed to operate. So later on, what we are going to talk about is well, first, I already told you that you're living in slavery right now. So the type of slavery that they told you that we descended from, that we came from, is not all the way true. There's truths in it, but it's not all the way true. Okay, because they told you this grandiose form of slavery so that you wouldn't be able to understand and overstand that you are a slave right now. All right. So later on, we'll talk about the so-called 13 black colonies. And then we're going to talk about the American Revolution that lasted 1775 to 1783 and how this was a swarthy revolution. You need to understand who was the king of the different kingdoms that were involved in this so-called war on that side of the Atlantic. And then you need to understand who the 13 colonies were on this side of the Atlantic so you can fully understand what truly happened. Because what they told you is a lie. All right, so this is just a background, a backdrop to help you fully understand the situation that we're currently in. So we're going to go ahead and dive into page 116 in Ancient and Modern Britons, written by David McRitchie. It says, what may be called genealogical evidence of the existence of black-skinned races existing in Scotland within historic times has already been adduced in considering the quote-unquote Moors, and it is difficult to decide whether the examples given ought to be styled Picts, so-called, or Danes, because both were Picts, quote unquote, and contemporaries. And the very district which still bears the name of the ancient, quote unquote, Moray men was also the very district in which the quote unquote Danes lingered longest. That is excluding the Isles, for which reason it had become the hunting ground of the fair-skinned victors, descendants of Freskine the Fleming, Beroald the Fleming, founder of the powerful Inns family, and others of kindred race. Therefore, when a black man is discovered on a family tree of 1,000 years ago, he may be either a quote unquote Dane or a quote unquote Pict. Of those, however, who are better known by the former name, there may be specified an ancestor of the MacLeods of MacLeod, the family being held to be descended at the date of Martin's visit to the Western Islands, and in his words, quote, from from Leod, son, the Black Prince of Man, end quote, which island was for a long time under the rule of the Danes. The father of this Leod was, in all probability, Olaf Svarti, or Olav the Swarthy, mentioned in the Flatian manuscript, who was king of Man during the 13th century. A certain branch of the Campbells had also a similar lineage. Pennant speaks of Sir Colin, quote, ancestor of the Breadalbane line, the famous knight of Rhodes, surnamed from his complexion and from his travels, Duib na Rum, or Black Colin of Rome. And in a manuscript history of the Campbells written about 1827, the author says, quote, the Rigdarin dub Loch Og, the Black Knights of Loch Awe, was the name then used by old Highlanders in mentioning the chiefs of the Duin Campbells, who on their followers were probably the quote swarthy men from Lorne, end quote, introduced in one of the legends. They must have been latterly displaced by a totally different race, and that member of the clan whom I have just quoted states that the Campbells nowadays boast of their yellow hair. Another and more distinctly visible member of this race may be seen in the beginning of the 11th century in that memorable ship that carried the Northmen to the American coast. Quote, now in Thorvard's ship was one Thorhall, who had been the huntsman in summer and in winter the steward of Eric the Red. He was, it is said, a large man and strong, black, and like a giant, silent and foul-mouthed in his speech, and always egged on Egida, Eric the Worst. He was a bad Christian. But a still more notable Black Dane was Earl Thorfinn, son of Sigurd, quote, the most distinguished of all the earls in the islands. His deeds are recorded with some minuteness in the Orkneyinga saga, and he is also referred to in the saga of Saint Olive. Quote, Earl Thorfinn was very precocious in his education and in every improvement. He was a strong man and ugly and of great stature. When he grew up, it was manifest that he was avaricious, harsh, and cruel, and sagacious. Now Thorfinn became a great chieftain, one of the largest men in point of stature, ugly of aspect, black-haired, sharp-featured, and somewhat tawny, and the most martial-looking man. He was then 5 winters old when Malcolm, King of the Scots, his mother's father, gave him an earl's title and Caithness to rule over. Okay, so what we just read is that the ancient so-called Vikings were actually what we would call Moors. So that's today's backdrop. Tune in for our next feature, which I have not decided what it's going to be exactly yet, but it's probably going to have something to do with, like I said, the 13 quote unquote black colonies or the swarthy American Revolution. So with that, um, may your day be the most blessed day that you could ever hope to attain. And may the love be with you. Peace and love.